Hello, and thanks for listening to another episode of Reaction, a show that helps us think differently about things that matter most. In our society today, we're always challenged with ideas and ideologies and information that allows for us to look at life in a perspective that may sometimes be different from other people may see it. And that is why we have this show Reaction, because we're putting it out there to allow us to think differently about things that really matter to us in our community, to our homes, and to the world at large. Politically, we can talk about issues regarding the Speaker of the House being changed, the upcoming presidency election, and even locally here in Philadelphia, the race for the city mayor and city council members. All of those things will shape how we think and view and navigate through life. So this show Reaction is built on us understanding how do we think about these things, thinking differently and sometimes even better along the way. Often what happens is if we get stuck and trapped into a way of thinking, we may be so myopic in that thought that we may not be able to find a pathway of understanding to seeing things in a way that can be helpful, beneficial, and more supportive in our communities. There are a lot of things happening in our society, whether it's in terms of criminal justice reform, whether it's in terms of education reform, whether it's in terms of some of the local and even national politics. But we have to be able to have open minds and understanding of thought to be able to look at these matters in a perspective that's going to lead, if not for change, at least a better conversation about it. So, Reaction, a show that helps you think differently about things that matter most. Two things that I want to share with you on today's episode that allow for us to hopefully think differently about and maybe come to some better understanding and or maybe even make progress in some regard. The first being the issue regarding still unprotected campuses of higher education. Just recently, there was a shooting at Morgan State University where four individuals were shot and wounded, and an incident that left the campus really devastated and destitute in the space of safety. Yes, we understand that President Biden has always provided funding for HBCUs and campuses across the nation in particular, but there is a dire need for how are we looking at making sure our children, in particular, again, our Black and brown children, HBCU campuses are kept safe. Just earlier this year, there was an incident near Edward Waters University where there was a shooting at the Dollar Tree adjacent to the campus. The individual first went through Edward Waters campus, but nothing happened, but there was a concern there. So, but what are we doing to make sure, again, our children are safe on campus? Higher education and learning should not be another level of induced stress with gun violence and or mass shootings on campuses. I've always been under the thought pattern that we should make sure that if these things are happening, we have to have the NRA speak loudly and clearly about not just gun safety, but the usage and the selling of guns of military grades on our street. Now, I do not know what level of weaponry was used on the Morgan State campus, and it may have been a gun, of course, purchased legally in all those avenues. But I'm really getting at the bane of my thought here is that if we are going to make sure that we're addressing the area of gun violence, we have to address it in a holistic totality approach. Meaning, we have to have conversations not just with our local key stakeholders, not just with our local law enforcement, not just with our local and then state and national legislators and local elected officials. We also have to have a conversation, including in that conversation, the NRA. Now, I know the NRA is not going to weigh heavily on these issues because, for the most part, go against their own self interest. They would not want anyone to not be able to understand that they have the right to bear arms. And I understand that from the constitutional level of what that means and what that all stands for. Also, though, along with that, there should be an understanding of if there is a right to bear arms, there should be a great level of arms that civilians should be able to purchase outside of the levels of weaponry that military and armed service individuals are allowed to have access to. And I'm not going against any of our listeners or viewers who are hunters or crafts persons and understand how to have gun safety and advocate for gun control and gun laws and the avenue of making sure they're in the proper hands of the proper individuals. I understand that. Nor am I saying that we should minimize any of the screening that should take place. That should be another level of concern that we have when we're talking about gun violence and the putting of guns in the hands of people who may not have the capacity to understand the wherewithal, the responsibility of being a gun owner. So I do believe that those are levels that need to be in play too. And I also do need for us to understand and even think about the proliferation of the guns that are on our streets in the city. There seems to be a wave of guns that are always in our city. We need to find out where those guns are coming from. Yes, some of those are straw purchases. Yes, some of those are ghost guns. And yes, some of these are illegal weapons that were stolen and confiscated in that capacity. But when we begin to really look at the, again, proliferation of guns that are in our street, day after day, week after week, we're seeing more guns in our streets than what could be manufactured as a straw purchase, which could be put together as a ghost gun. There seems to be a systematic issue of placing guns in our street. And we need to really address where are these guns coming from, how are they getting into our streets, and what can be done to eliminate that source. Again, fortunately enough, on Morgan State University, as of the time of this airing, there were no casualties at that shooting. But it's just horrendous atrocity on another college campus that, again, traumatizes our students and our young people, again, more so than they should have to. College should be a time of youth exploration, defining of self, finding of self, seeking careers, connecting with those who are going to be beneficial for your future, all the joys of higher education. That's what the campus should be. The stress level should only be for exams and tests, because we know that that comes. The stress level should not be of your concern of safety of being shot at or being shot. We have to really look at how we keeping our youth safe on our college campuses, how we keeping our youth safe across the board in our schools and in our communities. Gun violence should be something that should not just be trivially talked about. It should be seriously dialogued in a political campaign as part of any elected official or community stakeholder. And again, it has to be, in my opinion, engendered with conversation with the NRA as well. We cannot allow for them to go silent in these conversations when they have the wherewithal, they have a stake in this matter, they have influence in this situation. Time and time again, we hear nothing from them except for the avenue of gun safety. Keep your gun locked. Make sure you know how to fire your gun. Make sure you have the mental health screenings before you purchase a gun. 7 day. We hear all of that in terms of gun safety, and that's great. But what are we doing again about making sure the level of guns that are being sold in terms of the weaponry and caliber should be also discussed with the NRA so that they can understand how and why it's important to put a limit on that so that these casualties can begin to be minimized, and also we can have a better understanding of how we can put an end to some of these sales of high grade military weapons for individuals who mean no good at all. There should be no reason why someone, even if they're rightly screened, even if they're going through the background checks, should be able to buy a military grade weaponry for any urban city usage or any rural city usage for that matter as well. What war? What confrontation? What level of safety are they seeking to have to buy a military grade weapon, particularly in the inner city, suburban areas? But the NRA doesn't want to have that conversation because, again, it goes against their self interest, and they're always going to put up everyone has a right to bear arms. And that is true, we do. But it's a matter of what kind of arms you should be having a right to bear. So I share that with you because I want to hear your reaction to that. What do you think about the level of weaponry that is being sold in our gun shops? Do you think there should be a limit and a level of grade of weaponry that should be sold? Or is everything fine in terms of as long as they have mental health screenings, no previous criminal record, and the likes, and whatever the standards are currently now? Should that be changed or should it be the same? Let me know your reaction. Send me an email to reactionphl@gmail.com. I'd love to hear what you'd have to say about the level of gun safety, level of weaponry that should be sold, the caliber of weapon that should be sold in our gun shops across the nation, because it is a major concern. And also, I'd love to hear your reaction in terms of the thoughts of the guns that are in our streets and how they're coming into our streets. Is it a systematic approach? Is it a nefarious underground level of gun waves that's being placed into our community, similar to the drug and crack epidemic? Is it a demise for our community that's being systematically placed in our inner cities, to the demise of the social eco-structure of some of our communities? Let me hear your thoughts. Send me an email to reactionphl@gmail.com. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. School time has started. And for many of us, that school time should be a moment when we are able to make sure our children are learning and growing and developing and really understanding how to become a better student. And many of our classrooms across the nation are actually achieving those things. And I don't want to make it seem like they're not. But here locally in Philadelphia and quite a few other major cities, the academic progress of our youth isn't what it should be. Currently, as of the statistics and data that was provided from the 2021-22 school year, 34% of our children are at proficiency at English. 17% of our children are at proficiency to standards at math. 37% are at the proficiency level of science. And this is from grades 4 through 8, which are the almost crucial, critical years of academic learning and foundational understanding. 34% are at English level proficiency. 17% are at math level proficiency. 37% are at science level proficiency in the Philadelphia public school systems. And of course, we understand that some of the pushback would be that this proficiency level has been impacted, of course, by the COVID years, school year 2019, 2020, and 2020, 2021 school year. So those 2 school years, there were no standardized tests administered. So the numbers may have been challenged by that and then trying to get back to hold of that. So we're looking at actually numbers from the 2018, 2019 academic school year. But nonetheless, the data that shows from there that the drop off that we're showing now is also indicative of some of the challenges that are in our inner cities. 34% are at English proficiency. That's down from 36%. 17% at math proficiency. That's down from 27%. 37% at science. That's down from 47%. We're showing that this is really challenging our youth in their academic progress, and there's a dire need of something that needs to be done to get these numbers totally back in place to a level of where our youth are really being able to understand if they're going to school and growing in school, or is it just a place where they're just going as place sitting? And I'm not attacking our educators. I believe our educators are a vital part of our community. And I believe our educators need to have all the resources and supports and trainings and all the amenities that they would need internally, externally, to make it a conducive environment for learning. So I am not laying fault at the educators. It's a societal challenge. What are we doing as a whole when our children are not being able to grasp the fundamentals of English, math, science? What are we doing when, even in the city of Philadelphia, brotherly love, sisterly affection, the attendance levels of our students are dipping off? There's only 37% of students who attended school at 95%. There's only 10% of our students who attended school 80% of the time. So not only are we showing some of the academic slides in that regard, we're also showing some of the attendance level concerns. That's why, again, I'm not trying to point the finger at any level, but just trying to bring to light what are your thoughts in reaction to this? How are we going to address the level of educational data showing from the 2021-22 school year that these numbers are different and dramatically going in a direction that's not beneficial? Now, again, as I mentioned, there were 2 years where there were no standardized academic tests being administered. The 2019-2020 school year and the 2020-21 school year, there were no academic tests administered because of the COVID restrictions. But as of the 2021-22 school year, these numbers that I just shared, they're dramatically showing that our children are not yet rebounding or have yet come to a level of proficiency in areas that are most beneficial towards making sure we have a strong, stable, and robust economy. Some of this could be correlated to some of the crime, gun violence, and behavior that we're seeing exhibited in our streets. And I'm not trying to paint a broad brush to make that connection, but I am trying to say we can't be naive to the fact that some of this does have that impact. If we only have 10% of our students attending schools 80% of the time, where are they at and what are they doing? And I understand that there are family dynamics where some youth have to take care of responsibilities in their home, so therefore their attendance are not going to be at a level where we would like to think that it should be. And we have to be sensitive and understanding of how can we help those students to in those social contextual areas of family support that they would need. If our children aren't in school, then of course then those numbers are going to dramatically be as they are, and they're all going to be stagnant at that level, if not dip a little lower. So that attendance level has to be looked at as to what's driving this low attendance, because those low attendance impacts the numbers. Those numbers are going to continue to show what they are. And I don't believe it's because our students are not, if you will, intelligent, smart, or good learners, or whatever the colloquialism or phrase or epithet you would like to use. I would like to really think that our children just aren't in position to be able to consistently understand the importance of their education, and also our educators may not have all the resources that they need to be able to provide that to our children. I'm not crippling the creativity of our innovative educators, because there are many who are out there doing a marvelous and wonderful job, and there are some who are even exceeding the expectations and responsibilities of their job requirements. And I am not trying to point the fingers at any school or any educator who may or may not fall into the category of not being able to be at what the world would quote unquote call the best. I am again bringing out a collective understanding of what's just before us in terms of the numbers, what they're speaking of the 2021-22 school year. 34% proficiency in English, 17% at math, 37% at science. A low attendance rate, and also we're looking at increasing economic challenges, rising, or if not continued, gun violence in our communities, political upheaval across the board. It's all correlative to how do we grasp and gain a foundation of making sure we can support our communities better. Education reform, again, should be another issue that's front and foremost. Community safety, for sure, we talked about that. But education reform in the capacity of not so much pitting anything against one another, but putting things together to help support our educators, our community, our families, our youth. 37% in science in an age of technological astonishment and accomplishment. 37% in the city of Philadelphia. 17% in math proficiency. It's challenging to know that economically that means how we are not able to understand basic fundamentals of finances because our math proficiency is not as what it should be. 34% at English. This goes to, again, the understanding of how we comprehending information that's given to us, how are we researching and being able to better ingest and understand and build on making change in a substantial and different way if there's no level of understanding of some of the rudimentary portions of English, which is reading and writing and the likes. We can do better, and I believe that. I believe that it's just a moment right now where these numbers are not being put out there to cast blame, but it's putting out there to put out a challenge. I believe these numbers are exactly that. They're a challenge to each one of us in our communities, myself included. How are we going to address this? How are we going to make this better? How are we going to bring about that change? How are we going to make sure that that 37% in science becomes 87%, that 17% in math proficiency comes at 97%, and that 34% in English becomes a 94%? What efforts are we going to take collectively? Are we going to support our schools continually? Are we going to advocate for educational resources for our educators, teachers? And are we going to challenge our political elected officials to allocate the proper funding into schools that really need it? Are we going to make sure that there's social service connections in a more substantial way, because I know it's there, but in a more substantial way that benefits the homes and the schools and the children that we serve, particularly here in the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection, predominantly Black city? Or are we going to just continue to let the numbers be as they are? I don't believe we will. I believe that we as a city will look at these numbers as a challenge and accept that challenge to make a change. I believe that that's going to be the clarion call when we see those numbers. Sure, there'll be few who will be, if you will, pointing the finger and ready to place the blame and start accusing, and others may want to start closing schools and dismissing educators from their place of employment. All that may be the case with some. But I would love to hear your reaction on it. Is this a challenge? A challenge for change? Or is it a challenge for crisis? I think it's a challenge for change. I'd love to hear what you'd have to say. Again, send me an email, reactionphl@gmail.com. I'd love to hear what you'd have to say about that. I believe it's a challenge for change. I believe it's a challenge for us to look at things as they are, believe that they can be better, and build on that. I really believe that. So as I close out this episode of Reaction, I just want to also make sure that we're talking about the political climate. There is the ongoing debate for the Republicans, the Republican Party. And just recently they had the second Republican debate. And not much has changed in the shift of the landscape of what's going on. Former President Trump is still the front runner in spite of some of his legal challenges that are out there. Some of the candidates in the Republican Party are making different headways. Nikki Haley, she's still holding strong. Governor DeSantis, he's still in the mix. Former Governor Chris Christie, he's also still out there. So there's the usual suspects who are still doing what they're doing in terms of maintaining hold. Vivek Ramaswamy, he's still ringing the bell and being as adversarial and as charismatically, politically astute as he can be. So there's still that mix that's going on in there. But one thing for certain, and one thing is sure, is that when we talk about the political landscape of the United States, we have to look at it in terms of the totality of how and what, not just what they're saying, but how and what will it impact us, people of color, and people across the nation as a whole, but particularly people of color. We have to be mindful of how it's going to look at issues that are germane to our everyday life. Now, I know the national elections often get that thrust, and we often are inundated with that through the national media and even some of the local media. But I would like to even put a pause and a pin in that when I'm talking about how these elections will be important. We have to think about the local elections as well. In Philadelphia, we have coming up in November the election for the new mayor in the city, and then also the placement of potentially new city council members, and also some judges. All of these are elected officials that will have a key influence and key impact on our local communities. One of the things I would challenge each one of us to do, particularly here in the city of brotherly love, but any of you who may be listening across the nation in your own particular city come election time, is to become thoroughly immersed and engaged and informed about the candidate for as much as you can, for as long as you can. Don't just know their names, know their platforms. Don't just listen to sound bites, listen for the substance. Don't just go off of what you think. Find out for sure so that you can know. And this way, you'll be electing someone in your office who you know that they will be able to support your communities. There's a lot of things happening in the city of Philadelphia in the terms of legal system, and it's almost an affront because no one took time to understand the voting of judges in and out of their positions. And again, I'm not trying to be adversarial or point fingers and say certain judges have to go or not go, but there are certain individuals, if we look at their records, we know that they would not be beneficial in serving us in the office of judge or even city council or even mayor, and the list could go on. I just wanted to put that out there because, again, when we go out there and we vote, we can't vote blindly. Yes, it was a right that was fought for our ancestors and forefathers died and fought for that. And we understand the importance of getting out and registering to vote. We also have to add now to it, if you will, the 21st century thrust to that, to not just get out and vote, or not just register to vote, I should say, but getting out to vote and understanding who and why we're voting for that individual. Because if we just get out and vote without understanding the who and the why, we're limiting ourselves to the understanding of what type of political impact we can really make. We can truly make a stronger political impact once we realize not just who we're voting for, but why we're voting for that individual based off of their political record, the benefit that they'll bring to our community, and the totality of their length of service that they're going to have. So just wanted to put that out there as well, and I'd love to hear your opinion about that. Again, send me an email to reactionphl@gmail.com. Love to hear your reaction of the things that matter most. In this episode, we talked about 3 things. We talked about the gun control and level of caliber of guns that are being sold. We talked about the declining of educational progress in our major city here in Philadelphia. And we also talked about being informed on a political level, not just getting out to vote, but knowing who we're voting for. So, again, I'd love to hear your reaction to those 3 topics and the things that I just shared. And those are the things that matter most that we have to always have conversations about. So, send me an email to reactionphl@gmail.com. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about the things that matter most in our community. So as we wrap up this show, a segment of Reaction, I definitely appreciate you taking time to watch this episode and taking time to subscribe to our YouTube channel and being able to be part of the show every time we air. So it's greatly appreciated. So we air first and third Saturdays of the month at 10:30. And tune in at YouTube channel, Reaction PHL, if you should happen to miss it. But we thank you for taking time to be part of this episode. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time. But remember, always have your reaction to things that matter most and think differently about those matters to make a better change. Talk to you soon.